I spent 30 years raising my son with every drop of love in my heart, selling my jewelry, my furniture, even my husband's old car, to give him the perfect $19,000 wedding. But when he took the microphone that night, looking directly into my eyes, he uttered the words that shattered my world. "I want to hug my real mother," then pointed at my mother-in-law. As everyone in that grand reception hall stared at me with pity and contempt, I slowly slid off my wedding ring and placed it on the table. What no one knew was the devastating secret hidden in a medical envelope I'd kept buried in my dresser drawer for 3 decades. A truth about my son's birth that would turn this public humiliation into something far more sinister. Who is the real mother? What dark arrangement happened at that fertility clinic 30 years ago? And why did the wealthiest woman in town wait until my son's wedding day to claim him as her own? Follow my channel to uncover the shocking truths that will leave you questioning everything you know about motherhood, sacrifice, and what makes a family real. Like this video and comment where you're watching from, I read every single comment. I'll never forget the feeling that washed over me that night in Ohio. The warm yellow lights of the reception hall bounced off my daughter-in-law's white dress, making her glow like an angel while everyone around her smiled. Everyone except when they looked at me. Each glance cut through my chest like I was an intruder, an impostor. Me, who had sold my jewelry, my furniture, even my late husband's old car, just to pay for this wedding that cost nearly $20,000. But it wasn't just their contempt that hurt. It was my son's silence, my own flesh and blood. He would walk past me without meeting my eyes, as if my very presence embarrassed him. There was something strange hanging in the air, a suffocating mystery, and I still didn't understand why. But I already had one painful certainty. That night would change my life forever. I'm Martha Wilson, 63 years old, and for 30 years I've lived in the same modest house in Dayton where I raised my son alone after my husband passed. I've always been the kind of woman who works hard without complaint. The type who wears the same dress to church for 5 years straight because every extra penny went to my son's education. The invisible kind of mother whose sacrifices go unnoticed until they stop. That evening, I wore my navy blue dress, the nicest one I owned, with the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary. I'd spent 3 hours at my neighbor Gladys's house, letting her fix my hair and makeup. "You deserve to look beautiful tonight, Martha," she'd said. But the way people looked at me when I arrived, you'd think I was wearing rags. The Harper family, my new in-laws, had rented the Grand Pavilion, the most expensive venue in town. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, a 10-piece band, things I could never afford, but had somehow managed to pay for by emptying my life savings and taking out a second mortgage. "Nothing's too good for my boy," I'd told the wedding planner with a confident smile that hid my trembling hands. I remember standing by the gift table, watching my son dance with his bride. They were so beautiful together, like something from a magazine. Sarah's family clustered around them, taking pictures, laughing. I stood alone, clutching my purse where the checkbook sat like a ticking bomb. Then came the first blow. When I handed the check to the catering manager, I saw the waiters whispering, the manager furrowing his brow. They knew. The check I had written was worthless. I had nothing left. I did it to save my son's honor. But what I didn't know was that at that very same microphone, minutes later, he would choose to destroy me in front of everyone. "Is there a problem?" the manager asked, holding my check between his fingers like it was contaminated. No problem at all," I lied, my voice steady despite the earthquake inside me. "The funds will clear tomorrow morning. I just moved some money between accounts." He nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe me. And why should he? Women like me don't throw $19,000 weddings. Women like me serve food at weddings like this. As I turned away, I caught Elizabeth Harper, Sarah's mother, watching me with those knowing eyes of hers, those perfect blue eyes in that perfect face, with that perfect smile that never quite reached those eyes. She'd been watching me all night, like a cat waiting for a mouse to make a fatal mistake. "Martha, darling," she called, waving me over with her manicured hand. "Come sit with us. You look so lonely over there." The table fell silent as I approached. 5 pairs of eyes, all belonging to Sarah's relatives, all staring at me with barely concealed judgment. "We were just saying how generous you've been with this wedding," Elizabeth said, her voice dripping with something that wasn't quite kindness. "I mean, considering your situation." I smiled tightly. "Nothing's too good for my Michael." "Of course not," she agreed, patting my hand. Her diamond ring caught the light, almost blinding me. "He deserves the very best." Something in the way she emphasized best made my stomach knot. There was a hidden meaning there, a secret language I wasn't privy to. The DJ's voice boomed through the speakers. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the groom would like to say a few words." My heart swelled with pride as Michael took the microphone. My beautiful boy, the spitting image of his father, with those warm brown eyes and that dimple when he smiled. I'd raised him alone since he was 10, after Robert's heart attack took him from us. Every parent-teacher conference, every baseball game, every nightmare and triumph, just him and me against the world. Or so I thought. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Michael began, his voice steady and sure. "This is the happiest day of my life." I felt tears well up in my eyes. Despite everything, despite the bounced check and the whispers, this moment made it all worthwhile. "There's someone special I need to thank," he continued. "Someone who has guided me, supported me, and loved me unconditionally." I reached for my napkin, dabbing at my eyes, ready for him to acknowledge my sacrifices. "I want to hug my real mother," he said. And then he pointed right at the Elizabeth Harper. The room erupted in applause, while I sat frozen, unable to breathe, unable to comprehend what was happening. Elizabeth rose gracefully, tears streaming down her perfect face as she embraced my son, while cameras flashed all around them. In that moment, as hundreds of eyes turned to stare at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, I understood the weight of betrayal. Not just my son's betrayal, but something deeper, older, more sinister that had been brewing for years without my knowledge. With trembling fingers, I reached for my wedding ring, the last thing of value I still possessed, and slowly slid it off my finger. I placed it on the table with a soft clink that nobody heard over the continued applause. I didn't know then what dark secrets lay behind my son's words. I didn't know what web of lies had been spun around us both. But as I sat there, with my empty finger and my worthless check, I made a silent promise to myself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. Ever since I became a widow, my life had been reduced to saving every penny. I'd wake up at 4:30 every morning, my bones aching from the previous day's work, but I never complained. Not once. The tiny alarm clock beside my bed, the same one Robert had given me for Christmas 20 years ago, would buzz, and I'd silence it before it could complete its first ring. My routine never changed. Shower, coffee, prayer, then off to clean houses before most people had even opened their eyes. "You work too hard, Martha," my neighbor Gladys would say, watching me trudge up my driveway in the evening, my hands raw from cleaning chemicals. "That boy of yours is grown now. Time to live a little for yourself." But how could I explain to her that everything I did was for Michael, that every floor I scrubbed, every toilet I cleaned, every casserole I sold at the church bazaar was so my son could have what I never did? Opportunity. "Mama, one day I'm going to pay you back for everything," Michael used to tell me when he was in high school, watching me count quarters from my tip jar to pay the electric bill. "I'm going to buy you a big house with people to clean for you instead." I believed him then. I believed in the way his eyes shone with determination when he said it, the way he'd squeeze my shoulder with those young hands that looked so much like his father's. But things changed when he met Sarah Harper during his final year of college. She was beautiful, smart, and came from money, old Dayton money, the kind of family with a name on buildings, the kind that summered in Cape Cod and had connections. I was happy for him. Truly I was. But the first time I met her parents at their sprawling Tudor home in Oakwood, I felt it. That subtle shift in Michael's demeanor, the way he carefully corrected my grammar when I spoke. The way he mentioned my quaint little house as if apologizing for it. The way he subtly distanced himself from my world, from me. When they announced their engagement last Christmas, I smiled and hugged them both, even as my heart whispered warnings. "We want a proper wedding," Elizabeth Harper had said, her eyes appraising me like I was a service she was considering hiring. "Nothing modest." I understood her meaning perfectly. Nothing like what I could afford. That's when the planning began, and with it, the whispers. I'd arrive at wedding vendor appointments to find decisions already made, decisions I couldn't possibly afford. The Harpers suggested this venue, the wedding planner would say, showing me price sheets that made my stomach turn. They said not to worry about the budget, but I did worry. I worried every night at my kitchen table, calculator in hand, watching my life savings dwindle to nothing. I sold my mother's antique bureau. I pawned my good winter coat. I even sold Robert's fishing gear that I'd kept all these years because it still smelled faintly of him. How's she going to pay for all this? I overheard Sarah's aunt ask at the bridal shower. I heard she cleans houses for a living. Elizabeth says they're just humoring her, another voice replied, letting her think she's contributing. I responded with silence, but inside I burned with humiliation. They thought I was nothing, a nobody who couldn't even provide for her only son's wedding. I would show them. I would give Michael the wedding he deserved, even if it broke me. The night before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my checkbook. The balance showed $312.47. The final payment for the reception was $19,000. I had already put down deposits using credit cards that were now maxed out, loans from my church friends, and the money from selling nearly everything I owned. My hands trembled as I held my pen over the check. I knew what I was about to do was wrong, illegal even. But in that moment, all I could think about was the look of pride on Michael's face when his friends saw the beautiful wedding his mother had provided. Not charity from the Harpers, from me. Just a little more time, I whispered to myself. After the wedding, I'll figure something out. Pick up more houses to clean. Maybe sell the house itself. The check felt heavy in my hand as I wrote it, each number a weight on my conscience. But what choice did I have? What would be worse? A bounced check or my son's humiliation? That night, as I held the checkbook in my hands, my heart pounded like a drum. I knew I had no funds, but what would be worse? Seeing my son humiliated for not having a decent wedding or carrying the burden of this lie. I chose the lie. For him. Always for him. What I didn't know then was how deeply the Harpers had already sunk their claws into my son. How Elizabeth Harper had been whispering in his ear for months. Don't you want to know where you really come from? Don't you deserve the truth? I didn't know that while I was selling my belongings to pay for flower arrangements and champagne towers, Elizabeth was showing Michael old photographs, telling him stories, planting seeds of doubt about the woman who had raised him. And I certainly didn't know that by the time I handed over that worthless check, my son had already chosen sides. I remember the first time I met Elizabeth Harper as clearly as I remember the day my Robert died. Some memories burn themselves into your mind, refusing to fade, even when you pray they would. It was a crisp October afternoon when Michael brought Sarah home to meet me. My hands were raw from scrubbing Mrs. Donovan's bathroom tiles all morning, but I'd rushed home to bake a fresh apple pie, Michael's favorite. I'd even splurged on a small bouquet of daisies for the kitchen table. I wanted everything to be perfect. "Mom, this is Sarah," Michael said, his arm around a slim blonde with the kind of polished appearance that comes from having money your whole life. She was beautiful in that effortless way. Straight teeth, clear skin, clothes that looked casual, but probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Wilson," Sarah said, her smile genuine enough that I immediately liked her. She handed me a bottle of wine that I later discovered cost more than I made in a day. "Please call me Martha," I replied, wiping my hands nervously on my best apron, the one without any stains. We had a lovely dinner. Sarah was polite, asked about my quilting hobby, even complimented the faded curtains I'd sewn myself years ago. I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, the difference in our backgrounds wouldn't matter. Then came the knock at the door. "Oh, that must be my mother," Sarah said casually. "I hope you don't mind. She was shopping nearby and wanted to drop off some brochures for my internship application." Before I could respond, Michael was already opening the door, and there she stood, Elizabeth Harper, like a page torn from a luxury magazine. Tall, slender, with that perfectly highlighted blonde hair that never seems to move. Designer clothes that whispered rather than announced their cost. And those eyes, cold blue eyes that sized up my entire home in one sweeping glance. "What a charming little place," she said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. Her heels clicked against my worn linoleum floor like little hammers. So cozy. I knew what cozy meant in her language. It meant small, poor, beneath her. "Mom, this is Mrs. Harper, Sarah's mother," Michael said, and I noticed how he stood straighter, spoke clearer, as if auditioning for a role. "Elizabeth, please," she corrected, extending her hand with its perfect manicure and diamond ring that caught the light from my modest ceiling fixture. "So lovely to finally meet you, Martha. Michael has told us so much." Her smile never reached her eyes. It stopped at her lips, which were painted the exact shade of a warning sign. "Would you like some coffee? Or pie? We were just about to have dessert," I offered, hating how my voice sounded smaller in her presence. "Oh, I don't do sugar," she replied with a little laugh, as if I'd suggested something absurd. "But don't let me interrupt." She didn't leave after delivering the brochures. Instead, she sat at my kitchen table, making small talk that felt like a series of tiny paper cuts. Each question seemed innocent enough, but carried a hidden blade. "And what did you do before cleaning houses?" she asked, making my profession sound like a temporary embarrassment. "I worked at the textile factory until it closed," I answered. "Then I did whatever I could to support Michael after my husband passed." "Such a struggle," she said, patting my hand in a gesture that looked sympathetic but felt condescending. "Single motherhood must have been so difficult for you both." The way she said it, as if my motherhood had been a burden to Michael rather than a blessing, made something twist in my gut. I noticed how she watched my son, her eyes following him with an intensity that seemed odd, almost possessive, and when she laughed at something he said, I caught a glimpse of something in her expression, a private joy, a secret satisfaction that made me uneasy. As they were leaving, she pulled me aside with a smile that didn't match the ice in her eyes. "He's such a special young man," she said, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "So much potential, more than most people realize." Then she leaned closer, her expensive perfume clouding around me like a fog, and whispered in my ear, "He always deserved more than you could give him." I stood frozen, the words hitting me like a physical blow, as she glided back to her luxury SUV with its vanity plate and tinted windows. After that first meeting, she was everywhere, calling Michael with opportunities he simply couldn't miss, inviting him to family events where I was either not invited or made to feel like the help, offering to mentor him in business, in etiquette, in life. During the wedding preparations, I watched as she skillfully inserted herself between me and every decision. "Martha, dear, don't worry yourself with these details," she'd say, waving away my suggestions with her manicured hand. "I know exactly what Michael would want." As if she knew my son better than I did. As if 28 years of motherhood meant nothing compared to her few months of whatever she was doing. In those months before the wedding, I noticed how Michael changed when she was around. He stood differently, straighter, stiffer. He spoke differently, dropping the slight Ohio accent I'd never managed to lose myself. He even laughed differently, more restrained, more like her. "I was talking with Elizabeth about investment opportunities," he'd say, or, "Elizabeth thinks I should apply for this position instead." Elizabeth, not Mrs. Harper. Elizabeth. As if they shared some special bond that transcended the normal boundaries between a young man and his future mother-in-law. At the wedding rehearsal dinner, I watched her holding court at the head table, my son at her side, hanging on her every word. Her eyes caught mine across the room, and in that moment I saw it clearly. that gleam, that triumphant sparkle. She knew something I didn't. She was waiting for something to happen. And at the reception, as I stood with my worthless check in hand, watching her whispering to my son with that same secretive smile, I finally understood that whatever she had been planning was about to unfold. I just never imagined how completely it would destroy me. While the reception hall vibrated with music and the delicate clinking of champagne glasses, I might as well have been stranded on a deserted island. The expensive crystal chandelier cast shadows across faces that turned away when I approached, laughter that stopped when I drew near. I had never felt more alone in a room full of people. I stood in a corner clutching my small beaded purse, the same one I'd carried to my own wedding 30 years ago. Inside was my checkbook with its damning empty balance, like a ticking time bomb. The catering manager, a thin man with a perpetual frown, had been circling me for the past 20 minutes, waiting for the right moment to approach. Finally he did. "Mrs. Wilson," he said quietly, leaning in close enough that I could smell his mint breath. "I need to speak with you about the payment." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Our accountant has concerns," he said, his eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. "The bank flagged the account when we called to verify funds." My mouth went dry. I hadn't expected them to check so quickly. "There must be some mistake," I lied, the words sticking in my throat like thorns. "I transferred money between accounts yesterday. It sometimes takes a day to process." He didn't believe me. I could see it in the slight narrowing of his eyes, the tightening of his lips. "I'll need another form of payment by the end of the evening, Mrs. Wilson. Otherwise?" He let the threat hang in the air between us. "Of course," I whispered. "I'll take care of it." As he walked away, I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back, despite the reception hall's aggressive air conditioning. What would I do? I had nothing left to give, nothing left to sell. The shame of having the caterers announce to everyone that the mother of the groom couldn't pay would destroy Michael's perfect day. I couldn't let that happen. One lie after another, all to protect my son's honor, to protect my own pride, to show the Harpers that I wasn't the nobody they thought I was. I slipped away to the ladies' room, locking myself in a stall adorned with gold leaf wallpaper that probably cost more per square foot than my entire bathroom at home. I sat on the closed toilet lid, my hands shaking as I opened my purse and stared at the checkbook. That's when another memory surfaced, sharp and clear, as if it had happened yesterday instead of almost 30 years ago. A memory I'd tried so hard to bury. It was a sterile doctor's office with magazines so old their covers were curling. I sat alone, 5 months pregnant with Michael, waiting for the results of some routine tests. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind thick glasses, had called me in specifically, which wasn't normal procedure. "Mrs. Wilson," he'd said gently, "there's something we need to discuss about your pregnancy." My hands had instinctively gone to my swollen belly, protective, afraid. "Is something wrong with the baby?" I'd asked, my voice barely audible. He shook his head. No. The baby is perfectly healthy." Relief had washed over me, but only for a moment. "Then what is it?" He'd hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "There are some inconsistencies in the blood work." "What kind of inconsistencies?" He'd leaned forward, lowering his voice, though we were alone in the room. "Mrs. Wilson, there's a chance, a small chance, that the baby you're carrying may not be biologically yours." The words had hit me like a physical blow. "What? That's impossible. I'm pregnant. I can feel the baby move." "Yes, you're definitely pregnant," he'd agreed quickly. "But there are markers in the blood tests that suggest, well, it's very rare, but sometimes errors can occur during certain fertility procedures." "Fertility procedures?" I'd repeated, confused. I didn't have any fertility procedures. The doctor had looked equally confused then. "You weren't treated at the Riverside Fertility Clinic?" "No, I've never been there. This pregnancy happened naturally." He'd shuffled through his papers, frowning. "I see. There must be some mix-up in the records." I apologized for the confusion, but I'd seen something in his eyes. Doubt, uncertainty. He'd handed me an envelope with the test results. "You may want to keep this just in case, but try not to worry. As I said, the baby is healthy, and that's what matters most. I'd taken the envelope with trembling hands and shoved it into the bottom of my purse. Later that night, I'd buried it in my dresser drawer beneath old sweaters I never wore. I didn't tell Robert. I didn't tell anyone. I convinced myself it was a mistake, a clerical error, nothing more. But now, sitting in that opulent bathroom stall with a worthless check in my hand, that memory demanded attention. Why had it surfaced now of all times? What was my subconscious trying to tell me? I ran my fingers over the checkbook's leather cover, worn smooth from years of use, hidden in my bedroom at home beneath those same old sweaters. That medical envelope still waited, unopened, unexamined, a question I'd never had the courage to fully face. I took a deep breath and stood up. I couldn't hide in here forever. I had to go back out there and face whatever was coming. As I re-entered the reception hall, the band was playing a slow song. Couples swayed on the dance floor, including Michael and Sarah, looking like something from a fairy tale. My son, my beautiful boy, held his bride close, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. Across the room, Elizabeth Harper caught my eye. She raised her champagne glass slightly in my direction, a toast that felt more like a threat. Beside her stood her husband, tall and distinguished with silver temples and a strong jaw. Genetic gifts he'd passed to. I froze, the thought hitting me with stunning clarity. The resemblance between George Harper and my son had always been there, but I'd attributed it to coincidence. Now, with that old medical mystery echoing in my mind, I saw it with new eyes. The same strong jawline, the same way they tilted their heads when listening, the same dimple in the right cheek when they smiled. Could it be? Could that mix-up at the fertility clinic have been more than a clerical error? Before I could process this thought, the catering manager was at my elbow again. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, more firmly this time, "I really must insist on resolving the payment issue now." As I fumbled for an excuse, I caught Michael watching us from across the room. For a brief moment our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen in my son's eyes before when he looked at me. Contempt. It was then I knew that whatever was about to happen would change everything, and that old envelope in my dresser drawer might hold the key to a truth I wasn't ready to face. The music stopped abruptly, like someone had unplugged the entire band at once. The sudden silence felt heavy, pressing down on my chest as the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone twice, producing a hollow sound that echoed through the grand reception hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with practiced enthusiasm, "it's time for a few words from our groom." The crowd applauded politely as Michael made his way to the small stage. My heart swelled with a mother's pride despite everything. He looked so handsome in his tailored tuxedo, so much like his father it made my chest ache. I found myself holding my breath, waiting to hear what he would say, hoping for some acknowledgement of the sacrifices I'd made to give him this perfect day. I remember thinking, "Please, Michael, just say thank you, Mom. That's all I need." He adjusted the microphone, his face solemn. The spotlight caught the gold of his wedding band, a band I'd helped him choose, though he'd rejected my suggestion to use his father's ring. "Too old-fashioned," he'd said. Now I wondered if there had been another reason. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady and clear. The room fell completely silent. Even the servers stopped moving, trays of half-empty champagne glasses frozen in midair. "Sarah and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people we love on the most important day of our lives." He smiled at his bride, who beamed back at him from her seat at the head table, radiant in her designer gown that cost more than my car. I felt myself relax a little. This was normal, expected, the standard speech every groom gives. "But tonight," Michael continued, "I want to do something a bit different." Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. There was an edge there, something I'd never heard before. My fingers tightened around the stem of my water glass. "They say a wedding is a time for truth," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "A time when we stand before those we love and make honest commitments for the future. But I think it's also a time to be honest about the past." The room grew so quiet, I could hear the ice melting in my glass. Across the room, Elizabeth Harper leaned forward slightly, Her perfectly lined lips curved in what might have been a smile. "I've been blessed with an amazing family," Michael went on. "People who have supported me, guided me, loved me unconditionally." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Despite everything, the bounced check, the whispers, Elizabeth's strange behavior, this moment made it all worthwhile. My son was acknowledging me, appreciating the life we'd built together. "Today, I want to do something special," he said, his voice taking on a tremor of emotion. "I want to hug my real mother." For one beautiful, suspended moment, I thought he was looking at me. I even started to rise from my chair, my arms already opening to embrace him. Then he turned and pointed directly at Elizabeth Harper. The room collectively gasped, then erupted in confused murmurs. I remained half-standing, frozen in place, my arms still partially raised in expectation of an embrace that would never come. "Elizabeth Harper gave birth to me 30 years ago," Michael said, his voice now thick with emotion. "Circumstances forced her to give me up for adoption, but fate brought us back together when I fell in love with her daughter." The words hit me like physical blows, each one a hammer striking my heart, shattering it into smaller and smaller pieces. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room began to spin around me, faces blurring into a carousel of shocked expressions and curious stares. Elizabeth rose gracefully from her seat, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, arms outstretched as she walked toward my son. My son, the boy I had carried for 9 months, given birth to in 16 hours of excruciating labor. The child I had nursed through chicken pox and broken arms, taught to ride a bike and drive a car. The young man whose college tuition I had paid by cleaning other people's toilets and scrubbing their floors. "It's true," Elizabeth said, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Michael is my biological son." They embraced in the center of the room, cameras flashing all around them, capturing the moment for posterity. A beautiful reunion, a miracle, a perfect wedding moment. No one was looking at me anymore. No one except George Harper, whose eyes bore into mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. What did he know? What part had he played in this elaborate deception? Someone was applauding, and then everyone was, the sound swelling like a wave, drowning out the roaring in my ears. People were standing, smiling, wiping away tears at the beautiful moment they had just witnessed. Beautiful for everyone except me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. It was as if I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. This couldn't be real. My son, my Michael, claimed by another woman, on his wedding day, in front of everyone we knew. As the applause continued, Michael took the microphone again. "I've only known the truth for a few months," he said, "but it explains so much. Why I never quite felt like I belonged. Why I always felt there was something more waiting for me. Each word was a knife twisting in my heart. Never belonged. After everything we had been through together, every sacrifice I had made. I want to thank Martha," he said, finally acknowledging my existence, "for raising me. But I'm so grateful to have found my real family at last. My real family. Not you." Something broke inside me then. Some essential part that had been holding me together through all the hardships, all the struggles. The part that had always believed that no matter what, my son loved me, needed me, saw me. With shaking hands, I reached for my wedding ring, the last thing of value I still owned. The gold band Robert had placed on my finger with such hope and love 3 decades ago. The ring I had refused to sell, even when we couldn't afford heat in the winter, even when Michael needed braces, even when the roof leaked and we had to put buckets around the house to catch the water. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled it from my finger. The pale indentation where it had lived for 30 years looked naked, vulnerable. I placed the ring on the table with a soft clink that no one heard over the continued applause. Then I stood up on legs that felt like they might give way at any moment and made my way toward the exit. No one tried to stop me. No one even seemed to notice I was leaving. As I reached the door, I turned for one last look at my son, this stranger who had once been my whole world. He was still on stage, arm around Elizabeth, grinning as people lined up to congratulate them on their Reunion. The envelope in my dresser drawer flashed in my mind again. The blood test. The doctor's confused expression. There's a chance, a small chance, that the baby you're carrying may not be biologically yours. Could it be true? After all these years, could I have been raising a child who wasn't mine? Or was this some elaborate lie Elizabeth had concocted to steal my son away from me? Either way, in that moment, as I slipped silently out of my son's wedding reception, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Elizabeth Harper rose from her seat like a queen ascending her throne, her designer dress catching the light as she moved toward Michael. Her tears seemed to glisten perfectly on her cheeks, never smudging her expensive makeup. I watched from my seat, paralyzed, as she embraced my son. No, the son she claimed was hers, with a dramatic flair that belonged on a movie screen. There was something theatrical about her grief, something rehearsed in the way she pressed her hand to her heart. I had cleaned houses for actresses before, wealthy women who summered in New York and wintered in Dayton, and I recognized the performance. This wasn't spontaneous emotion. This was a scene she had practiced. "Oh, Michael," she cried loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've waited so long for this moment." The guests ate it up, murmuring in appreciation at the beautiful reunion unfolding before them. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Isn't it just like a Lifetime movie?" Yes, exactly like that. Scripted, directed, performed for maximum emotional impact. As I watched her cling to my son, a memory surfaced with such force it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. A memory I had buried deep, like so many painful things from those early years of motherhood. It was 3 years after Robert died. Michael was 13, all gangly limbs and voice that cracked mid-sentence. Money was tighter than ever. The factory had cut my hours, and Michael was growing so fast he needed new clothes every few months. I had taken on an evening cleaning job at the offices of Harper Industries, the manufacturing company owned by George Harper's family. I remember clearly, it was a Wednesday night in November. The office was supposed to be empty. I was vacuuming the executive floor when I heard voices from behind a door marked G. Harper, CEO. I shouldn't have stopped, shouldn't have listened, but something in the urgent tone made me turn off the vacuum. "You can't keep coming here, Elizabeth," a man's voice, George Harper, said tensely. "We agreed, it's over." "Nothing's over until I say it is," a woman replied, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Not after what you took from me." "I didn't take anything that was rightfully yours." A bitter laugh. "Tell that to my son. The son you made me give up because it would be bad for business to have your pregnant mistress around while your wife was expecting." The vacuum cleaner handle had slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a thud. I scrambled to pick it up, heart pounding, terrified they'd heard me. They hadn't. The argument continued, but I'd turned the vacuum back on, drowning out their words, desperate not to hear anymore. I finished my shift in a daze and never returned to that cleaning job, making up an excuse about the hours conflicting with Michael's school schedule. I had buried that memory, dismissed it as misunderstood fragments of a conversation between strangers about people I didn't know. But now, watching Elizabeth clutch my son with possessive hands, it roared back to life with new, horrifying meaning. Elizabeth Harper had been George Harper's mistress. She had been pregnant at the same time as his wife. She had given up a baby, a son. Could it possibly be true? Could Michael actually be their biological child? My mind raced through the years, searching for clues I might have missed. The strange coincidence of Sarah and Michael meeting at that particular university fundraiser, hosted by Harper Industries. The immediate connection between Michael and the Harpers. The way George had looked at my son that first time we met, with recognition, not curiosity. And then there was that medical envelope, still hidden away in my dresser drawer. The doctor's confused words echoing in my memory. "Were you treated at the Riverside Fertility Clinic?" I hadn't been. But what if Robert had? What if he had made decisions, arrangements that he never told me about? The applause around me swelled as Elizabeth wiped away her perfect tears. "I never thought this day would come," she announced to the rapt audience. "To not only gain a daughter in Sarah, but to reclaim the son who was taken from me all those years ago." Taken from her? Is that what she believed? Or what she wanted everyone else to believe? I felt a presence beside me and turned to find George Harper standing there, his expression unreadable. Up close, the resemblance between him and Michael was even more striking. The same cleft in the chin, the same set of the eyes. "Martha," he said quietly, "I think we should talk." Before I could respond, a commotion near the head table caught everyone's attention. The catering manager was speaking urgently to the event coordinator, waving a piece of paper that I recognized with a sinking heart. My check. "Is there a problem?" Elizabeth called out, still center stage, still performing. The catering manager looked uncomfortable. "It's nothing that can't be handled privately, ma'am." But Elizabeth Harper had no interest in privacy, not when there was drama to be mined. "Please, we're all family here," she said with a gracious wave of her hand. "What seems to be the issue?" The manager hesitated, then spoke. "The payment for the reception. There seems to be insufficient funds." A collective gasp rippled through the room. All eyes turned to me, faces showing everything from shock to pity to thinly veiled satisfaction. "Martha?" Michael's voice tight with embarrassment and something else. Anger, perhaps. Or was it triumph? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? That I had written a bad check to save face? That I had emptied my life savings and still couldn't afford the wedding his real mother thought he deserved? Elizabeth's eyes gleamed with a predator's satisfaction. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "How embarrassing for you, Martha. But don't worry. George and I will cover it, of course. We wouldn't want anything to spoil our son's special day. Our son." The words hit me like physical blows. "This isn't what it looks like," I finally managed, my voice sounding thin and desperate even to my own ears. "It looks like you tried to pay for something you couldn't afford," Elizabeth said, her tone gentle, but her words cutting. "It looks like you tried to pretend you were something you're not, just like you've been doing for the past 30 years, pretending to be Michael's mother." The room fell silent. Even the servers stood frozen, trays in hand, unwilling to miss a moment of the unfolding drama. "I am his mother," I said, finding strength I didn't know I still possessed. "I carried him for 9 months. I gave birth to him. I raised him." Elizabeth's smile never faltered. "Did you, Martha? Did you really carry him? Or did you and Robert make other arrangements? Arrangements at the Riverside Fertility Clinic, perhaps? How did she know about that? How could she possibly know about the clinic the doctor had mentioned all those years ago? Unless she had been there too. Unless my buried memory and that unopened envelope held the key to a truth more twisted than I could have imagined. I stumbled out of the grand pavilion, the cool night air hitting my flushed face like a slap. My vision blurred with tears as I pushed through the heavy double doors, past the valets who averted their eyes in awkward pity. Behind me, the sounds of the reception continued. Music, laughter, the celebration carrying on as if my world hadn't just imploded. The sidewalk swayed beneath my sensible navy pumps, the ones I'd carefully polished for this special day. A day that was supposed to be about my son's happiness, not my public humiliation. My fingers instinctively reached for my wedding ring before remembering I'd left it behind on that table, alongside my dignity and the identity I'd held for 3 decades. Michael's mother. I made it as far as the small garden area adjacent to the parking lot before my legs gave out. I collapsed onto a stone bench, the same one where earlier that day I'd watched Michael pose for photographs with his groomsmen, all of them laughing, carefree, handsome in their matching tuxedos. Had he known then what he was planning to do? Had he smiled for those pictures already knowing he was about to disown me in front of everyone we knew? "Are you all right, ma'am?" I looked up to see a young parking attendant hovering nearby, concern etched on his boyish face. No more than 18, with kind eyes that reminded me of Michael at that age, before college and ambition, and the Harpers had changed him. "I'm fine," I lied, fumbling in my purse for a tissue. "Just needed some air." He nodded, unconvinced. "Would you like me to call you a cab?" A cab, of course. My old Ford Taurus was at home. I'd arrived in the limo with Michael and his groomsmen playing my assigned role of proud mother. The limo that would now be taking him and Sarah to their hotel, or perhaps straight to the airport for their honeymoon in Bora Bora, another expense the Harpers had insisted upon. I don't have cash for a cab, I admitted, the reality of my financial situation crashing down on me anew. The bounced check, the maxed out credit cards, the second mortgage, all for a son who had just publicly rejected me. I could drive you, the attendant offered. My shift ends in 15 minutes. His kindness nearly broke me. After an evening of calculated cruelty, this stranger's simple offer of help felt like a life raft in a stormy sea. That's very kind, but I'll manage, I said, mustering what remained of my pride. Thank you. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pressed something into my hand. At least take this for the bus. It's not much, but it'll get you home. I looked down at the crumpled $5 bill, and something inside me shattered completely. This boy, this minimum wage worker, was showing me more compassion than my own son had. Thank you, I whispered, unable to look up, afraid I'd completely dissolve if I met his gentle gaze again. He left me there on the bench, alone with the distant sounds of my son's wedding reception and the shards of what had once been my life. The crisp Ohio night wrapped around me like a shroud, stars twinkling indifferently overhead. The same stars that had witnessed every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd worked late, every luxury I'd denied myself so Michael could have more. Michael, my beautiful boy, with his father's eyes and dimpled smile. The baby who had cried only when I handed him to someone else. The toddler who'd clung to my legs on his first day of preschool. The teenager who'd helped me fix the leaky roof during that terrible thunderstorm. Both of us soaked and laughing despite our poverty. How had we gone from that to this? How had the child who once refused to sleep unless I sang to him become the man who could point to another woman and call her his real mother? A movement caught my eye. A figure approaching from the direction of the reception hall. My heart leapt traitorously, hoping against hope it was Michael coming to apologize, to say it had all been a terrible mistake. But it wasn't Michael. It was Gladys, my next-door neighbor for 20 years, who had helped me zip up my dress earlier that evening and assured me I looked beautiful. "Martha," she said, settling beside me on the bench, her arthritic hands reaching for mine. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "You shouldn't have left the reception," I said. "The dessert table was magnificent. All those chocolate fountains and petite fours." Gladys snorted. As if I could stomach another bite after that spectacle. She squeezed my hand. What Michael did in there, it wasn't right. The simple validation of my pain broke whatever composure I had left. The tears came in earnest then, hot and fast, each sob wrenched from somewhere deep and primal inside me. "I don't understand," I gasped between sobs. "I gave him everything. Everything, Gladys." "I know you did, honey," she murmured, her arm around my shoulders. "I watched you do it for 20 years. Then why? Why would he believe her? Why would he do this to me?" Gladys sighed, her breath visible in the cool night air. "Rich people," she said simply, as if those two words explained everything. "They have ways of making people see what they want them to see. Ways of making their version of the truth seem like the only version." I thought of Elizabeth Harper's perfect tears, her impeccable timing, the theatrical way she'd embraced my son. The performance had been flawless, rehearsed down to the smallest gesture. How long had she been planning this? How many private conversations had she had with Michael, planting seeds of doubt about his parentage, offering him a glossier alternative to his humble origins? She called herself his real mother, I said, the words still burning like acid on my tongue. As if the past 30 years meant nothing. As if raising him, loving him, sacrificing for him meant nothing compared to what? Biology? Money? Status? "Some people measure family in blood," Gladys said quietly. "Others measure it in love and time and sacrifice. You know which measurement matters more. But Michael doesn't," I whispered. "He chose her. He chose what she was offering," Gladys corrected. "A fantasy, a shortcut. a way to belong to their world without having to work for it. We sat in silence for a moment, the distant sound of the reception's music a painful reminder of the celebration continuing without me. "What do I do now?" I asked, the question hanging in the cold night air. My entire adult life had been defined by being Michael's mother. Every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of joy and pride, all centered around him. Who was I, if not his mother? "Now," Gladys said firmly, helping me to my feet. "We go home. You take a hot bath. We have some of that blackberry brandy you keep for special occasions. And tomorrow, you start figuring out who Martha Wilson is when she's not just somebody's mother." As we walked slowly toward the bus stop, my borrowed $5 clutched in my hand, I looked back one last time at the brightly lit reception hall. Through the large windows, I could see the dancing continuing, champagne flowing, my son at the center of it all with his new family, the family he had chosen over me. In that moment, something hardened inside me, a resolve, a determination I hadn't felt in years. If Michael could so easily discard 30 years of love and sacrifice, if he could stand before everyone we knew and deny me as his mother, then perhaps Gladys was right. Perhaps it was time to discover who I was beyond my role as his mother. And perhaps it was also time to uncover the truth, the real truth, behind Elizabeth Harper's theatrical claims and that mysterious medical envelope that had haunted me for decades. Days after the wedding, I finally found the courage to open the envelope that had haunted me for 3 decades. My hands trembled as I pulled open the bottom drawer of my dresser, pushing aside the faded sweaters that had served as its hiding place all these years. The manila envelope was yellowed with age, its corners soft and frayed, but the medical seal of Riverside Memorial Hospital remained intact, a ghostly blue imprint on the paper. My living room was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the old grandfather clock Robert had inherited from his father. It was nearly midnight. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows, as if nature itself was providing a soundtrack for this moment of reckoning. I sat in Robert's old armchair, the one I could never bring myself to sell, despite its worn upholstery and sagging cushions. It still smelled faintly of him, Old Spice and motor oil, the sense of my former life, my former happiness. For several minutes, I just held the envelope, staring at my name written in faded blue ink, Martha Wilson. Inside was a truth I had been too afraid to face, a question I had buried beneath years of motherhood and sacrifice. "Just open it," I whispered to myself, my voice sounding strange in the empty house. "Whatever it says can't hurt you more than you've already been hurt." With a deep breath, I broke the seal and slid out several pages of medical documentation, their edges crisp despite their age, protected all these years by their paper cocoon. My eyes scanned the first page, medical terminology swimming before me, HCG levels, progesterone, amniocentesis results. Then on the second page, highlighted in yellow, genetic inconsistency detected. Patient shows no biological maternal markers matching fetal DNA. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The words confirmed what the doctor had suggested all those years ago, a possibility I had refused to consider, had actively pushed from my mind. There was indeed a chance that Michael was not biologically mine. But how? Robert and I had conceived naturally. I had felt the morning sickness, the swelling, the movement inside me. I had given birth in that very hospital, endured 16 hours of labor, heard his first cry, felt him placed on my chest. How could he not be mine? I turned to the third page, a letter from Dr. Samuel Westfield, the specialist who had ordered the additional tests. Most of it was clinical, detached, but one paragraph near the bottom caught my eye, words I had never fully read in my panic 30 years ago. While the genetic anomaly suggests the fetus may not share your DNA, Mrs. Wilson, I must emphasize that this does not necessarily indicate any irregularity in your pregnancy. There are rare cases of genetic chimerism or sample contamination that could explain these results. Regardless of genetics, the child is healthy and requires continued maternal care. Biology aside, you are this child's mother in every way that matters. I read those last lines again, tears blurring my vision. Biology aside, you are this child's mother in every way that matters. The words both soothed and stung. Dr. Westfield had understood what Michael apparently could not, that motherhood transcended DNA, that the woman who nurtures, protects, and sacrifices is the true mother, regardless of genetic connection. Tucked behind the letter was another document I hadn't noticed before, a small note on official letterhead from the Riverside Fertility Clinic, dated 2 weeks after my appointment with Dr. Westfield. Upon review of hospital records, we have identified a potential procedural error that may have occurred during routine testing. 2 patients with similar names were processed on the same day, which could have resulted in sample confusion. We recommend follow-up testing for clarification. Please contact our office to schedule an appointment. I never saw this note, never followed up. The clinic had apparently sent it to the hospital rather than directly to me, and in the chaos of late pregnancy and preparing for a newborn, it had been tucked into this envelope and forgotten. Similar names. My mind raced. Elizabeth and Martha weren't particularly similar, but perhaps. Then it hit me with stunning clarity. Elizabeth's maiden name. I had heard it mentioned once at a dinner, a casual reference that hadn't seemed important at the time. Wilkins, Elizabeth Wilkins Harper, Wilson, and Wilkins. Similar enough for a busy lab technician to confuse, especially 30 years ago before digital record keeping. Could it be? Could Elizabeth Harper and I have been pregnant at the same time, our tests mixed up, our babies' identities confused before they were even born? No, that made no sense. I had carried Michael, felt him grow inside me, given birth to him. Elizabeth couldn't possibly claim to be his biological mother unless she had been the genetic mother but not the birth mother. A surrogacy, a donor egg. The technologies had existed, though they were new and far less common 30 years ago. But for a wealthy family like the Harpers, anything was possible. My hands shaking, I turned to the final page in the envelope. It wasn't a medical document at all, but a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age. I didn't remember putting it there. Perhaps Robert had, though why he would have hidden it in with my medical records, I couldn't imagine. The headline read, Harper Industries, Air welcomes second child amid controversy. Below was a photo of George Harper and his wife Carolyn, leaving the hospital with a newborn. Their daughter, according to the caption, the date was just 3 weeks after Michael's birth. The article mentioned rumors of marital difficulties following allegations of infidelity, but noted the couple appeared united as they introduced their new daughter. There was no mention of a son, no hint of another child. But there, in the background of the photo, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a young woman with blonde hair being escorted to a separate car. Her face was turned away from the camera, but something about her posture, proud, defiant, seemed familiar. Elizabeth. It had to be. The pieces began to fall into place. The overheard argument at Harper Industries years later. Elizabeth's claim about a son taken from her. George Harper's resemblance to Michael, the fertility clinic mix-up. But what was the true story? Had Elizabeth been George's mistress, forced to give up their child to save his marriage? Had she been a surrogate or egg donor for the Harpers who later regretted her decision? Or was this all an elaborate lie, a scheme to claim my son for reasons I still couldn't fathom? Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. The woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation, who had turned my son against me and stripped me of my identity as his mother, had been planning this moment for years. The question was why? And why now, after all this time? As the rain intensified outside, drumming against the roof of the small house where I had raised my son alone, I carefully returned the documents to their envelope. Biology might be complicated, genetics might be confused, but one truth remained clear in my heart. I had been the one to raise Michael, to love him, to sacrifice for him. Whatever DNA might or might not say, I was his mother, and it was time for me to fight for that truth. What makes a mother? Is it the blood that flows through our veins, or the tears we shed while raising a child? As I faced the most devastating betrayal imaginable, I learned that motherhood isn't defined by genetics or legal documents. It's measured in midnight fevers tended, in meals skipped so your child can eat, in dreams sacrificed so theirs can flourish. Sometimes the truest family isn't the one that claims you with words, but the one that proves their love through unwavering presence. If you were in my position, would you fight for the child you raised? Or would you step aside for the truth they believe they've found? Would you let a lifetime of sacrifice be erased by someone else's carefully crafted story? The hardest lesson I learned was that sometimes loving someone means letting them make their own mistakes, even when those mistakes break your heart. But I also learned that my worth as a mother wasn't diminished by my son's rejection. The love I gave was real, whether or not he could see it. Thank you for joining me on this painful journey of betrayal and revelation. If my story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their sacrifices matter. Follow my channel for more true stories that explore the complicated bonds of family and the strength we find when those bonds are tested. Remember, the family that truly matters isn't always the one connected by blood. It's the one connected by love that stands the test of time.